Are animals capable of committing a crime? Well, what about stealing? And is there a true culprit in such strange cases? The bizarre story of this neighborhood in the suburbs will have you questioning lots of things, and knowing the identity of the culprit behind it all will shock you. Laura's neighborhood was on edge. For the last 2 weeks, a strange series of items with no seeming relationship had been disappearing without leaving a trace. All the neighbors suspected each other, sure that there was a thief among them. But what kind of thief would take such random objects? Lots of complaints were heard, reporting everything from toys and garden decorations to bags and valuable jewels. But as the tension in this once close-knitted community grew, a woman had a bright idea that would reveal the truth behind these cases, surprising everyone in the neighborhood. Welcome to Wonderbot Animals, where the wildest stories of the animal world come to life. Just a few years ago, Laura had moved into a new neighborhood in the suburbs. It was everything she had been expecting. All was calm and quiet, and the neighbors were very kind and friendly with each other. In her 3 years living in that neighborhood, she had never had a problem. But since a few weeks ago, things couldn't be simply worse. First, she started having some terrible sleeping issues that made her stay awake all night, leaving her tired and energyless for the whole morning. The one behind this problem was a bird, more specifically an owl. Laura at first had thought of the little bird as something fun, an event that had made her night more interesting for a couple of times. It used to stand on the tree near her backyard and hoot for some minutes before leaving. When Laura looked at the owl looked back at her, and so she felt less lonely. But the problem began when her vacations ended and she had to go to work. Now, the insistent singing of the owl was starting to irritate her, distracting her so much she couldn't even get to close her eyes. Laura lost important hours of sleep, and that wasn't the worst of all. Her memory was getting all foggy, and she started to lose her belongings. It was so strange. At first, she couldn't find simple things like her toothbrush and her comb, but as her sleepless days kept going on, she began losing her collars and bracelets too. As if her problems weren't enough, Laura wasn't the only one. The rest of her neighbors had also reported lots of valuable and non-valuable things that they had just recently lost, leading the community to think that maybe there was a thief living among them. You may wonder, how do these cases connect with each other? Sit tight. The answer will amaze you. At first, the neighborhood thought of it as a harmless prank between neighbors, or part of a strange child's game that only kids understood. But one day, Miss Gerda, an old and grumpy woman with a considerable influence among her neighbors, reported that a very valuable decoration of her house had been stolen. Someone must have sneaked in through her yard. The neighbors were shocked by Gerda's accusation. So far, they all had held their tongues and wanted to think of the missing items as a very bizarre coincidence. But now, someone had clearly stated that it could be a case of theft. This was the first of many strange things that would happen to this community, because only a few days later, something even more mysterious happened. Something unbelievable was revealed when Laura finally found the owl's nest, bringing chaos into her once pacific community. It began with Laura losing her sleep, then her things, and at last, Laura lost her tranquility too. When her neighborhood declared that there was a criminal on the loose, Laura declared that she was completely desperate. What I once had thought as my paradise had become hell, and I couldn't sleep to forget it. So, at least, I tried to handle the one thing that was in my reach, that owl. Laura's neighborhood in the suburbs was connected with the forest, filled with great dark green pines all over the area. So each of the backyards, in a way, were connected with all of this nature, and the presence of crows, owls, and raccoons was something that the community was used to. But Laura felt as if a line had been crossed. She didn't have the patience to listen to the bird anymore. She needed to recover the control of her life and her sanity. That day, she had a date, and there was nothing she wanted more than to return home and sleep peacefully after it. So she went out to her yard and walked to the edge of the forest with a broom on her hand. "Sorry, little friend, I just cannot deal with this anymore. Laura would repeat to herself as she walked through the woods in search of that owl and its nest so that she could drive it away for once and for all. But the road was messy and it was getting dark. She had to watch her steps, and the further she entered the forest, the more she felt it was a waste of time. How would she even find that owl specifically? Laura used to think she knew where the nest would be, but in reality, the situation was even more complex, almost a case of finding a needle in the haystack. So, after some time of struggling, squinting her eyes to see the top of the trees better, and raising her broom against the tall branches with no result, she finally gave up. Considering this one-sided fight lasted for over an hour, making her feel more stressed, powerless and annoyed, Laura decided she wouldn't go out after all, and she opted to sleep for the rest of the night, even though she knew she wouldn't rest due to the owl's pending noises. "It was stupid," Laura would later recall. "I fought an animal and I lost. But after, things only got stranger and I learned to never question that there is a lot more to the natural world than we could ever know." She added, because after that very night, when Laura woke up, she found out that the jewelry she had been planning to wear on her date had disappeared. She was shocked, shivers running down her body. Was it true? Was there really a thief in her neighborhood, one that, just as in Miss Goethe's case, had entered her house and taken her things? Laura thought things couldn't get stranger, but she would have never imagined what happened after she resolved to do the following thing. She bought a pair of cameras and installed them, one in her yard and one in her living room. Her situation was difficult and strange, but in the end, Laura didn't want to give up. The night she installed the cameras, she felt at ease with herself and finally managed to have a decent sleep. But what she saw on the camera on the next day left her completely breathless. Laura had to ask herself, had that been happening every night without her knowing about it, even though it occurred right in her face? The shocking truth was what happened next. The first hours had passed without a single issue. The video only included her, sleeping calmly on her bed. There was no sound. There was no movement. But then, after skipping for a couple of hours, Laura's mouth opened wide as she saw that something was entering her room. It was the owl from before. It entered through the window and landed on the room, but the more bizarre thing of it all was its stillness. After landing on Laura's table, the animal simply stood still. Its brown feathers and white spots puffed as the bird kept watch on the woman, just like it had done before Laura's vacation ended. But now there was something mysterious to it. It was very strange and unlike anything Laura had seen or heard before. Laura would later comment, "It felt as if it was something out of a legend. I mean, some night birds are an ill omen, right? And at that moment, there definitely was something eerie with this owl." As she watched the recording, Laura knew that it didn't matter who she told this story to. No one would believe her. Besides, who would she call? The police? Animal control? It was unnerving, but at least after a few minutes, the owl moved. It flew around the room some more, and before taking off through the window, it grabbed Laura's glasses from the bedside and took them with it, as if they were its prey. At least now Laura knew why they were missing. The event had been strange, and it had left Laura a bit shocked, but she also thought that maybe it didn't mean much. Or at least she held that impression for the longer part of her day, because when she returned from work, an idea so strange it was more fit for an old mystery novel came to her mind. She had to ask herself if just that was what had been happening to her, if that owl was the reason behind all her things getting lost. It was hard to believe. That's when Laura realized that what applied to her might even apply to the rest of the community. In other words, what if the bird was the thief? The following day, Laura held a meeting with a neighbor and friend of hers, Eliza. But when she told her of her ideas, Eliza just laughed in her face. "So you're trying to tell me that Miss Goethe's statuette, the flowers of the couple in the 1126, my daughter's play ball, and your jewels were all stolen by a bird? A bird? And you're expecting me not to laugh?" Eliza said, unaware of the truth that was about to be revealed thanks to her, against her own words and expectations. She tried to console her friend. "You're stressing out too much, Laura. I know your job is getting harder. Don't you think that's the root of all of it? Sum it to our thief situation, and here you are, about to have a nervous breakdown and accuse an animal of committing a crime. But you have to believe me. Look, see the video, Laura cried. It doesn't matter if I believe you or not, but I think I know what might help you. And I hope this can bring some sleep and much-needed peace. What her friend Eliza suggested was simple, but effective. Even if Eliza herself didn't think it would help much, or even work at all, she believed that just trying would be enough for Laura. Her idea was crazy, but Laura decided to go along and trust her. She proposed to put more cameras around and to purposefully leave out all kinds of attractive objects like food, cheap jewelry and toys. And in the case the bird was attracted then, Laura could follow it and find out the direction where it left all of the things it would have stolen. And because at that point she didn't have anything else to lose, Laura agreed and started working right away. Almost obsessively, she dedicated herself to this enormous task. She bought more cameras and not without hardship placed them all around her house. There were new angles everywhere, on her yard, on her front door, on her living room and the bedroom, all so not a single movement would be unrecorded. She then connected all those cameras to her computer and made sure that they were all working. Her neighbors had questioned her as she worked, but she just answered with a smile that they couldn't understand. Then, Laura gathered a bunch of those random items and placed the more attractive of those all over the house. On the floor, there were toys and balls of all sports, fruit too. On the shelves, bright fake jewelry and some plastic Christmas decorations now adorned the many tables and drawers of her house. It looked like a scene out of a kid's active imagination, but it was reality at its weirdest, and things were only about to get more unbelievable. At the end of the day, she was exhausted, but now she could rest. The most important part was about to start. She tightly gripped her cup of coffee and looked intently at her computer, ready to keep watch on the activity inside of the house. She had a couple of expectations, but what was about to happen with that owl would blow her mind away. Laura waited. She waited for hours. Finishing cup of coffee after coffee, she was starting to fall asleep when a swift movement caught her eyes. A rush of dopamine ran all over her body. She could barely hide her excitement. All of her body tensed up, electrified, as she watched the little intruder make its way from the backyard to the living room, jumping from camera to camera. In that moment of ecstasy, Laura would later admit her first words made her sound more obsessed than she really was. I got you. She would whisper to her target as it explored her house. Once again, it was a beautiful brown owl, adorned with precious white spots all over its body. It jumped from high place to high place, from the chair to the table to the sofa to the drawer with a little help of its wings. The animal was curious, a true proof of the intellectual reputation of these night birds, and now it had a parade of objects to toy with and test. Laura asked herself, was it planning to bring one of those objects to its nest? Was it perhaps a mother looking for food, or the right materials to protect its children? It first stopped and pecked a rubber ball that fell off the table, alarming the animal. But once it calmed itself, it stood over an apple and started pecking it too. Maybe it's just a hungry animal, Laura thought. Eliza was right. I might have been overthinking it. Laura sighed deeply, feeling ashamed of how far she had taken things. She thought that maybe she was going crazy. But just as she was about to turn off her computer and simply shoo the bird away, the owl once again shook her expectations. What? Laura said, amazed, and immediately ran off the room where she was hiding towards the living room. Through the recording of the camera, Laura saw that the owl grabbed not only one, but two different pieces of imitation jewelry, a collar with its beak and a bracelet on its claws. Then the animal took off, flying towards the yard. But this time, Laura was ready to follow it and discover the end of the mystery. She grabbed a flashlight and ran deep into the edge of the forest. If her heart was in the right place then, she was about to find the owl's nest and in the vicinity, all of her neighbors' belongings. I don't know what overtook me, Laura would later report. It was as if I had suddenly entered a story like Alice in Wonderland, chasing a rabbit, a flying rabbit in this case. I felt as if there was some sort of invisible connection between me and that owl, something that is hard to put into words. We had looked at each other, we had understood each other before, and now I was about to truly understand its mind after I stepped into its territory. But of course, the path wasn't easy. I almost got lost a couple of times. This thought terrified her. Laura was completely conscious that in the case she got lost, no one would hear or even search for her, as she hadn't notified anyone that in that night she was executing her plan, not even Eliza, who might have taken her determination as a part of the joke. Yet still, even though the forest was dark and the road was filled with wet leaves and pine needles, Laura kept advancing and kept her balance firmly, grabbing tightly onto branches not to fall and pushing herself from tree trunk to tree trunk. The woman was afraid, but her curiosity was pushing her to break her limits. She felt that with each step, she was about to uncover the truth behind that bizarre situation and finally understand the reasons behind the actions of her strange feathered neighbor. The owl kept flying swiftly, but from time to time it stopped on its tracks and turned its neck to see Laura. It was conscious that she was following it, but instead of flying higher or into any other direction to lose her, the bird slowed its pace and waited to be followed. Standing on the top of a tree, its eyes shining brightly in the dark, but in a way that seemed to Laura almost understanding. I thought for a second, Laura admitted, that it felt as if it was trying to convey to me some safety, as if it knew why I was following it, and it was inviting me to find out its secret. I know it's strange, but I could feel my connection with the bird was growing as we walked together. Laura said that at a certain point they were even moving side by side. She thought that maybe it was due to the bird understanding the items Laura had left in her house as gifts for its nest. And, luckily for her, that made the rest of the route easier. But suddenly, Laura had to stop right in the middle of her tracks as the owl flew to its territory, shocked, her mouth wide open. What was in front of her had left her completely breathless now. All things were about to make sense, even if the explanation behind it surpassed all logic. Laura reported it as a magical moment, something out of this world. What seemed to be an empty clearing in the middle of the forest suddenly came to life after the owl let a gentle hoot out. And then, as if that secret password had been enough to assure the community's safety, even as Laura was intruding in their space, little by little bright yellow eyes seemed to appear from everywhere, sparkling in the middle of the trees, emerging from holes in their trunks, blinking curiously, both from the high branches and from holes in the ground. It was the protected territory of a community of burrowing owls. What was even more surprising was all the things that were surrounding them. Laura was right. Everything was there. Hanging from the branches were many of the collars and bracelets, both the cheap and the expensive ones, and from the tip of the branches, pieces of thorn cloth from shirts and towers hanged. Burrows were adorned with toys around them. On the inside, Laura caught a glimpse of some plastic figures, while on the outside balls and pecked jumping ropes were protected by the birds as treasure. The place was covered with food, stale bread, and pieces of fruit. But the most interesting thing was to be found right in the middle of the clearing. Laura said that there was a part the owls jumped to protect. On a great mound, they piled all of their favourite objects. It was a very bizarre sight, she would say. It had everything we were looking for in the community, including Goethe's statuette. I immediately thought we couldn't simply move the owls again, you know. I was moved. I realized it was a whole community, including different species and families of owls. It was their place, and they were simply taking things to protect and decorate it. Laura reported she saw both big and small owls, mothers and babies from all colors, stripped and spotted. They entered their burrows and the holes on the trunks, and watched Laura carefully. She couldn't help crying at the sight. It was such a moving scene. The owls had decided to protect and entertain all the baby birds of the community, and it was thanks to that very owl that had visited her constantly that she was now aware of the existence of this sanctuary. So Laura immediately knew what she had to do. On the next day, Laura requested the presence of the neighborhood for a very important meeting and told them all about her new project. an owl sanctuary to protect this wonderful group of birds. Of course, her neighbours didn't believe her at first, especially Miss Greta. But after being doubted, Laura shut them all by delivering a larger part of their lost items. In their place, she asked them to make a donation, leaving an old rag or a toy or a shiny, cheap decoration in the park, so the owls would have an easier time taking them away without bothering anyone. Laura contacted the wildlife experts and activists to ask for help, and together they worked hard on making that very clearing into a safe spot and a bird refuge. The sanctuary quickly became popular as people all over the state travelled to see the group of curious owls that would design their burrows and nests with whatever they brought them. People took pictures with the happier-than-ever birds, and the biologists studied their unusually friendly behaviour while Laura managed to direct it all. Finally, she had found her purpose in life as she dedicated herself to protect the sanctuary while raising awareness to the importance and intelligence of these birds. It is now very difficult for me to imagine that all of these things started in such a strange period of my life. You truly never know what can happen, and you truly should never underestimate how important the connection between animals and humans are. It's hard to think it all started because of someone we thought was a thief. And that's Laura's story with the Owl Sanctuary, one that impressed the people of her community and forced them to make themselves questions they would have never thought of before. And now, do you think that animals are capable of committing a crime?